But you have some friends, don't you, Hans?
Yes, but I take pleasure in their pain.
Another absolute classic Hans Niemann interview, and I'll play a bit more of that later in the video. So what can we learn from this? Well, don't poke the moke. Do it at your peril. This guy means business when he sits down at the chessboard. Even off the board, chess is life and life is chess. That's something else he says in this interview. Now in round 5, he was playing against Levon Aronian. Sorry, let me shut the window here. The leaves are rattling, probably you can pick that up. And this was just an incredible fight from start to finish. Reminded me of another one of their battles that I'll link at the end of this video. Now Hans with white kicks off with e4 and we get the first big surprise on move 1, pawn c5 played. Listen to this from Yasser Serwan.
I'm kind of stunned. I mean, I'm looking at Levon. Levon Aronian has played 3 lifetimes of chess, and they've always been e4, e5 whenever he's been black.
So Hans surprised, and after knight f3, e6 from Levon, the French variation, Hans now has a think for 10 minutes. What does Levon want? What's he got planned? You know, I didn't prep for this. So Hans decides to go for pawn c3, a Sicilian variation that's become quite trendy lately. Now he could have got an immediate d4, the open line, but he doesn't. He's setting up d4, Levon goes d5, e5 now in response. You could have also taken, but this is now creating ideas of an advanced French variation. You know, this is transposition if Levon had gone knight c6 here, but he didn't. He went d4, stopping Hans from going d4 himself. And now the main move here for white is bishop d3. Looks a bit weird, but it snakes its way into e4, and even though it sits unprotected on d3, if you have a capture, pawn captures, queen defends, white is fine. But d3 is played by Hans. He puts a pawn on that square, very anti-positional. What's this all about? The game already moving into new territory, but after knight e7 from Levon, we see the idea. Pawn g3 is now played, the bishop's fianchettoing. Here we see takes, the pawn recaptures. You want to keep these ones connected. And now Levon goes for a weird plan. What does the computer want here? Well, some standard development followed by b6, maybe then bishop b7, a6, the knight comes to f5, the bishop develops, etc. But he goes bishop d7, bishop g2, bishop b5, targeting this pawn. Now you don't want to go d4 and open this diagonal, stop the white king from castling. So c4 provoked, the bishop drops back, and this square has now been weakened. This is Levon's whole idea, but it's a bit contrived because look how many times that bishop has moved and it now sits on the square where this knight is trying to develop to. So after castles, knight f5, bishop b2 covering the square, bishop e7, queen e2, Hans has already built up a nice advantage. The knight can't develop. Yes, you can castle, but maybe it's black that will be coming in for a big attack. So what does Levon do here? He goes pawn h5, an aggressive move trying to stir up something over here. And Hans correctly does not go h4 in response. Then you can be running into g5 with a big initiative for black. So he plays knight bd2 developing, Levon carries on, and Hans doesn't now go g4. He could do that, already kick this knight, but he goes knight to e4. Not a bad move at all, and Levon again just doesn't play the most precise way. So he takes, but his best here was to immediately take on e4. Now why would you give the bishop? Well, you clear the square for the knight, and now you can go pawn h3. You close the file, but you kick back this one, and at least after knight c6, this knight's looking more secure, you know, can maybe jump to here, and if g4, which we see in the game, well now after this, and rook takes, the f file's not open, white doesn't have such an attack, black has some counterplay. Now we're going to see the relevance of this, because takes was played. Hans now recaptures with the f pawn. Normally you take towards the centre, but he wants to open this f line, and we'll see the pertinence of that, because after bishop takes, Levon needing to do something to complete his development, knight c6, we now get a great move from Hans, pawn to g4, removing this knight, which is closing the f-file, and asking an awkward question. Do you want to come here or here? Now Levon goes for this square. If he'd jumped here, there's knight captures, bishop takes, and rook f3 is one of many great moves. And the big problem is that the rooks are doubling. It's very hard to cover this pawn. If ever rook f8, there's queen h7 invading. If you go queen d7, the rooks still double. If you then have to drop knight d8, very passive. The whole thing's awful when you're trying to cover this pawn. So these are the big issues. Levon didn't come here. He hops into d4, but now Hans can capture, and Levon's whole strategy has gone wrong. You know, when you did all this stuff and you provoked c4, weakened d4, well, you wanted to occupy that outpost with a piece, not with a measly pawn that now blocks your knight, blocks the long-term prospects of your bishop. And now rook ab1 shows more problems for Levon. The b pawn is sensitive. Where's your king going to find safety? This way is always drafty. You know, an h-file attack could be coming. This way is drafty. Well, queen c7 was played, covers this pawn. We now get g5, great move, looking to open the position, rip it open like a tin of sardines or something. So g6 is played, and now h4. Really like that move from Hans. Looks counterintuitive. You know, why would you move a pawn, which is kind of adding defense to the king? Put it in the line of this rook and everything a bit more. Well, Hans has actually freed this square for his knight to maneuver, and that then opens the bishop. Really, really nice positional chess. And Levon just walks into this plan. Really strange play. I mean, it's a tough position to play, but rook c8 was best. You do stop knight h2 for a moment because e5 hangs. But after bishop b4, Hans can just execute his plan no problem, because you can't take this pawn, or after captures, knight captures, the bishop drops off. So instead, we see castles queenside played, but there's no respite coming. Hans goes rook b3, doubling those rooks. Now this bishop comes to d2, spinning into here. The rooks double, we get check. And now a really weird, inexplicable use of time really. Hans has got 33 minutes here. We're only on move 24, 16 moves to go, and he spends 26 minutes deciding between king h1 and king f1, because clearly you're not going to sack your queen. And he goes for king f1 eventually, the right move, but it looked really obvious. You know, why would you put your king on the h-file in line with the rook? Then the knight's, you know, going to be a bit pinned, and this drops with check. Just a weird use of time. And Levon, now it's his move, and he's in an absolute bind. What do you do? This pawn's about to cave in, and if you go knight a5, it still caves in. Yes, you recapture, but rook takes, the queen goes, and you can even give this check. Quite a nice picturesque move, you know, this is mate. So the king marches up, you invade. This is the kind of thing that can happen. You threaten mate, and if you cover with the queen, because by the way you have to sack the queen there, this is actually a checkmate. Just one sample line as to why knight a5 isn't working. So b6, forced, you have to block out the rooks, but you literally just drop a piece. I mean, this is really woeful chess from Levon Aronian. Like, bear in mind, this guy is no just ordinary super GM. He was literally the 4th highest rated player in the world at one point. He's the 4th highest rated of all time. So, you know, he's a top grandmaster, but playing way below his level at the moment. So rook takes on h4 played, looking for counterplay. We see knight f3, jumping, moving from the attack, hitting the rook, defending the pawn, rook g4, and now really good play by Hans. This is a real bone in the throat of the white position. You have to eliminate it. So rook e1, rook h8, and bang, there it goes, king e2, and now you've got the two minors playing against the rook, and they've got so many outpost squares, the king could be weak. This should be technically lost. But this is where it gets interesting actually, because rook h3 and Levon starts fighting. We get bishop e4, rook g2 check, the king takes that pawn, but now rook g5 because you've walked into a pin. Was the best move, by the way. If you went to the back rank, there were mating issues, tactical issues, but you've dropped a pawn, and after king f2, the rook has to move, but now black does have a passed g-pawn, just a little glimmer of counterplay. And the simplest way for Hans now to try and press his advantage on the queen side was with c5 or a4, a5, rip open some lines. If pawn captures there after c5, there's rook c3 to recapture. That was the way to go. But he goes rook a3, we get king b8, now rook a6, weird looking concept, but it stops this a5 move being played. The bishop covers b7, and we're going to see the plan, because after g5, knight d4, this is Hans's idea. He's hopping here with check, then going to gobble this pawn using the rook and knight combo. But Levon does get some counterplay now with the check. King e2, few more checks, the king staggering up. Now it runs to this side to hide from these checks, but here, great play by Levon. He seizes his moment to try and get the draw. He takes this bishop on e4. Otherwise, it was supporting knight c6 check. This one crashes and everything like that. It was really bad. So this is the best try. You shatter the pawn structure and pawn g4. And amazingly, this knight can't hop back to any decent square to cover that pawn. The king has run all the way over to the other side of the board, so things are a bit dangerous here. King d3 played. And now what should Levon play? Pawn g3. But he doesn't want to let the knight out of the box. This is his thinking. But actually, knight e2 was the best move here. You still go g2, king e3, white is winning, but this puts up more resistance here. This is one sample line. You can start kind of gobbling some pawns off the board here. Who knows if you can liquidate? Get it down to rook and knight versus rook, which I'm pretty sure I'm correct in saying is a theoretical draw. Fairly sure it is, but someone can correct me if I'm wrong. So that's what you maybe could have hoped for. But Levon missed to go g3. He plays rook f2 first, covering some knight squares, then preparing to run the pawn. But king e3 comes. It's too slow. Rook f1, king e2, rook f4. Now Hans is not going to repeat, of course. So he plays rook a3 back. And this is a great defensive move, covering a square. Ditching this one with check. King d3, but now he's in great position because this pawn cannot be taken. This is key, or knight c6 check, and the rook drops off. So Levon goes for rook e1 instead. Knight e2, great defensive move, covering the pawn some more. King b7 waits, king d2, attacks this rook, and now Levon really finding some poor moves. He plays rook to a1, allowing knight c1, covering the pawn and trapping that rook in the corner. That's why the rook was actually better on f1 or h1, something like that. So not to be too scornful about Levon's moves, but really poor for his standards with how he played in this game. So rook b1, you have to try and escape before king c2 comes. And Hans could have actually gone rook b3 now, forced the rook exchange, and the endgame is winning with the knight. But he goes rook g3 instead, still a winning move. If he can finish off correctly, we get check, king c3, now rook f2, the pawn drops, a5 played, a4 blocking, rook f1 hits that knight, it jumps in, rook a1 swinging, going for counterplay here, but Hans ignores, goes rook f4, check, now the pawn drops and rook takes on f7 check. And after king c8, he hops with this knight going for the key e6 pawn, even allowing b5 and this one dropping with check because in marches the king, the knight, the rook, the passed pawn running. This is too much to cope with. We get pawn a4 played, rook a7, stopping any further advance. There's no b5 or the rook drops. So rook c1 played, knight d4, and this forced resignation from Levon Aronian. He just can't advance any of the pawns. Sure, you can try pawn b5, but white can then push e6, and you can do this, but then this, you're about to get mated, so you can cover. Many different winning moves. This is a nice one. The king marches in. Let's say you keep pushing. Well, now there's this check. The king goes check, and this is even a mate, using rook and knight. One sample line. Devastating game. Now, if you want to see the rest of the interview with Hans Niemann, that's coming up right now. And then don't forget to check out another incredible game that Niemann and Aronian played at roughly this time last year. Truly remarkable how this has happened 2 years in a row. I hope you enjoyed and see you soon.
But you have some friends, don't you, Hans?
Yes, but I take pleasure in their pain.
What?
Like when I see many people here, when I see them lose, but this is not like a controversial thing. Everyone takes pleasure in their enemies losing. This is not like people just lie and say, oh, you know, I'm so respectful. Everyone's such good. No. And like I'm sure this entire playing hall, when I lose, they take serious pleasure in that. Okay.
I don't know.
I don't know. I'm just telling you. But you know, we all.
But what about friendships, Hans? Like
there's no friendships on the chessboard.
The chessboard, but what about outside of the
but
chessboard?
chess is life. Life is chess. Like
So you have no friend
the
in
game
the
of
world
chess
of chess?
continues on and off the board. Okay, it is a continuous, in perpetual game of chess until death.